Prince Edward Island in 1988 was known for its calm, close-knit communities, where everyone knew their neighbors and violent crime was almost unheard of. On November 12th, that peace was shattered when 36-year-old Byron Carr, a well-respected English teacher at Montague Regional High School, was found dead in his home at 24 Lapthorne Avenue in Charlottetown. To those around him, Carr was a kind, quiet man, devoted to his work and family. The discovery of his body shocked the entire island. Investigators soon learned that Carr had likely met the man who would kill him the night before, in the early hours of November 11th, somewhere in downtown Charlottetown. The crime scene revealed a violent struggle had taken place, and crucially, a message had been left on the wall reading, "I will kill again." This chilling note suggested the killer was not only brazen, but intended to continue a pattern of violence, striking fear throughout the province. In the late 1980s, with no modern DNA databases, the Charlottetown police faced an immense challenge in trying to identify a perpetrator who remained completely unknown, leaving the island with more questions than answers. The day Byron Carr was found, Charlottetown police quickly cordoned off his home, treating it as a high-priority homicide investigation. Officers and forensic experts combed through the house, documenting every detail and collecting physical evidence, including the knife and towel used in the attack. Witnesses were interviewed in the surrounding neighborhood, but very few had seen anything unusual on the night of November 11th. Investigators focused on Carr's last known movements, speaking with friends, colleagues, and anyone he had interacted with in the days leading up to his death. Police suspected that the killer was someone Carr had invited into his home, but without a name or description, leads were scarce. At the time, DNA technology existed, but was in its infancy, and there were no national databases to help match the evidence collected at the scene. The investigation was further complicated by the social climate of 1988, where members of the LGBTQ+ community often feared coming forward, leaving potential witnesses silent. Despite tireless efforts, the case quickly became one of Prince Edward Island's most perplexing mysteries, as the trail of evidence seemed to disappear into thin air. As the investigation into Byron Carr's murder stretched into the late 1980s and early 1990s, the case grew colder by the year. Charlottetown police maintained an open file, reviewing the evidence repeatedly, but the lack of witnesses and the absence of any solid leads left the investigation stagnant. DNA evidence collected from the scene, including skin cells under Carr's fingernails and traces on the towel, was preserved, but at the time it could not be effectively analyzed or matched to any suspect. Officers revisited the neighborhood multiple times, questioning residents about anyone unusual who may have been seen near Lapthorne Avenue, but memories faded and tips were sparse. The impact on the community was profound. Prince Edward Island had always been a place where neighbors watched out for one another, but Carr's murder introduced a chilling reality that danger could touch anyone. The LGBTQ+ community, already marginalized in 1988, experienced heightened fear. People who might have had information were reluctant to speak to police, worried about exposure or retaliation. The message left on the wall, above Carr's bed, stating, "I will kill again," became a haunting reminder of the killer's audacity and further intensified the island's anxiety. Over the next decade, investigators continued to follow any lead that emerged. Cold case units were consulted, and occasionally, tips came from outside the province, but they rarely produced actionable evidence. Police revisited Carr's personal connections, re-examining acquaintances, co-workers, and anyone who had been in contact with him in the weeks leading up to the murder. Despite these persistent efforts, the case remained unresolved, and for Carr's family, the uncertainty was unbearable. The preserved DNA evidence became a silent witness, quietly waiting for technology to advance. By the early 2000s, forensic science had progressed significantly, yet the isolated location of Prince Edward Island, and the lack of national DNA comparisons still prevented a breakthrough. The case remained a painful reminder that even in small, seemingly safe communities, violent crime could leave long-lasting scars. The cold years reinforced the reality that solving Byron Carr's murder would require both patience and the eventual intervention of a scientific approach that did not yet exist. The fear and mystery surrounding the murder also had a psychological effect on the island's residents. Parents became more cautious. Students spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy at Montague Regional High School, and the wider community struggled to reconcile the brutality of the crime with the peaceful environment they had always known. For nearly 2 decades, the killer remained a ghost, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a community living in quiet apprehension. Even as time passed, Charlottetown police never closed the case. Evidence continued to be cataloged, and detectives occasionally revisited the investigation with fresh eyes, looking for patterns or missed connections. The hope that science might one day provide answers kept the case alive in both official records and in the minds of those who remembered Byron Carr as a kind and respected teacher. By the mid-2000s, new developments in DNA technology began to offer a glimmer of possibility, hinting that after decades of silence, the story of Byron Carr might finally have a resolution. After more than 3 decades, the investigation into Byron Carr's murder finally gained momentum thanks to advances in forensic science. In the spring of 2022, Charlottetown police partnered with a private company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. This technique allowed investigators to take the DNA collected from the crime scene decades earlier and compare it with public genealogy databases, looking for distant relatives that could lead them to the killer. By carefully building family trees from these distant matches, police could narrow their search to individuals who fit the profile. The DNA evidence pointed them to one key person, Todd Joseph Gallant, who also used the surname Irving. In 1988, Gallant was 21 years old and living on Prince Edward Island. Records showed that he had a minor criminal record from the previous year and had moved away from the island shortly after Carr's murder. Over the years, he had lived in Texas and Arkansas before returning to PEI in 2022. The same year, police began their genealogical investigation. Investigators began to track his movements, confirming that he had been in Charlottetown at the time of the murder. With the genealogical work supporting the DNA evidence, police felt confident that they had identified the correct suspect. They also reviewed old police interviews and witness statements to verify that nothing contradicted the emerging picture of Gallant's involvement. In January of 2024, authorities finally acted. Todd Joseph Gallant was arrested in the town of Souris, Prince Edward Island, and charged with first-degree murder in connection to Byron Carr's death. A second individual was briefly detained during the investigation, but was later released as police focused entirely on Gallant. The arrest marked the end of a 35-year-long mystery, bringing the case out of the shadows and giving Carr's family and the island community long-awaited answers. The breakthrough was not only a victory for law enforcement, but also a demonstration of how modern science can solve crimes that were once considered unsolvable. DNA evidence, combined with meticulous genealogical work, had transformed a decades-old cold case into a live investigation. Police emphasized that while the arrest brought clarity, many questions remained, particularly regarding motive and the circumstances leading up to Carr's death. The community responded with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Many residents who had lived in fear for decades now had a name and a face to associate with the crime. The LGBTQ+ community, in particular, found some comfort in seeing justice pursued, even though the events of 1988 had left lasting scars. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest was a pivotal moment. Although they had lost loved ones over the years and endured decades without answers, seeing law enforcement finally identify the person responsible provided a sense of closure. Yet the emotional impact of the crime and the long wait for justice remained deeply felt. The breakthrough in the Carr case also served as a reminder of the evolving nature of criminal investigations. Techniques that were unavailable in the late 1980s had grown into powerful tools capable of revisiting old evidence and uncovering truths long hidden. For investigators, the success of the case reinforced the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining diligence, no matter how much time had passed. Following the arrest of Todd Joseph Gallant in January of 2024, the wheels of justice began to turn. Gallant was formally charged with first-degree murder and interfering with human remains in connection to the death of Byron Carr. In October of 2024, he entered a plea of not guilty in Supreme Court, setting the stage for a trial that would test both the forensic evidence and the painstaking genealogical work that had identified him. The case drew national attention as Canadians followed the developments in what had been one of the country's most infamous cold cases. As of late 2025, the case remains in pretrial proceedings, with court dates scheduled for various motions. Gallant's defense team has challenged aspects of the DNA evidence, questioning the legality of its collection and the methods used in the genealogical analysis. Meanwhile, Charlottetown police have maintained that the combination of preserved DNA and careful genealogical investigation is reliable and conclusive. They emphasize that the evidence links Gallant directly to Carr's murder, even decades after the crime. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest represents both relief and a bittersweet end to a long chapter of uncertainty. While they never got to see the immediate consequences of the crime in the years following his death, finally knowing the identity of the perpetrator has provided a measure of closure. The decades of fear, unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of living with an unsolved murder have finally been acknowledged through the legal process. The case also raises broader questions about motive. Was Carr's murder the result of a robbery gone wrong, or was it influenced by prejudice against the LGBTQ+ community in 1988? Charlottetown Police Chief Brad McConnell has stated that understanding the full context and motive remains a priority for law enforcement, emphasizing the importance of uncovering the social and personal factors that led to this tragic act. The arrest and ongoing legal proceedings have renewed public interest in cold cases across Canada. Investigators hope that the success of the Carr case, solved through modern forensic and genealogical methods, will inspire renewed attention to other unsolved crimes. It demonstrates that no matter how much time has passed, justice can eventually be pursued, and evidence can speak even decades later. Community members have reflected on the lasting impact of the crime. For Prince Edward Island, a province often seen as peaceful and safe, the murder of Byron Carr remains a stark reminder of vulnerability, fear, and the importance of vigilance. Yet the case also illustrates the resilience of a community committed to seeking justice, no matter how long it takes. The story of Byron Carr is one of tragedy, perseverance, and the slow march of justice. While the scars of the past cannot be erased, the combination of determined investigators, advanced science, and community support has finally provided answers that were once thought impossible. It is a testament to the enduring power of persistence in law enforcement and the relentless pursuit of truth. Even as the legal process continues, the legacy of Byron Carr and the resolution of his case offer hope that no crime, however cold or forgotten, is ever truly beyond the reach of justice. The haunting questions of 1988 are slowly being answered, closing a chapter of fear and uncertainty for the people of Prince Edward Island. Minto, New Brunswick, was the kind of small town where neighbors knew each other by name, and the rhythm of daily life followed the cycles of forestry and coal mining. Life was simple and safe, and violent crime was something residents only read about in distant newspapers. That sense of security was destroyed in late April of 2005. Fred Fulton, age 74, and his common-law wife, Verna Decarie, age 70, were pillars of the community. Fred was a talented guitarist and a familiar face at local events, known for his generosity and easy smile. Verna was beloved for her warmth, her love of cooking, and her devotion to family and friends. The couple's modest home on Slope Road reflected their quiet, steady lives. On the morning of April 26th, 2005, Fred's daughter decided to visit her parents after failing to reach them by phone. When she entered the house, she immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The scene inside was chaotic, with evidence of a struggle throughout the main living areas. It was clear that both Fred and Verna had suffered a violent encounter. Fred had attempted to defend himself, leaving signs of resistance that led from the living room toward the kitchen. Verna was found in the bedroom, and while investigators described the scene as severe, no graphic details were publicly released. Police later reported that the household had been thoroughly searched and disrupted during the attack, suggesting the intruder moved with purpose. Neighbors quickly gathered outside, shocked and frightened by the presence of police vehicles and flashing lights. The quiet town of Minto, usually a place of safety and routine, became the center of a criminal investigation that would capture national attention. People who had never locked their doors before now questioned whether they could ever feel secure again. The RCMP began an immediate assessment of the property, collecting fingerprints, tracing footprints, and interviewing residents in the surrounding area. Every detail of the house, from the arrangement of furniture to the placement of personal belongings, was examined for clues. Officers worked carefully to piece together a timeline of the events, knowing that swift action was essential to finding the perpetrator. As news of the murders spread, the community was gripped by a mix of sorrow and fear. Minto residents struggled to understand how a peaceful, quiet neighborhood could be the site of such a horrific event. The investigation had begun, but at that moment, no one knew who could have committed such a shocking crime. By the end of that first day, the RCMP had already identified a potential suspect, someone very close to the victims. The realization that the perpetrator might have been living right next door sent a ripple of disbelief through the town. Part of the story was becoming painfully clear. The threat had not come from a stranger, but from someone within their own community. Almost immediately after the murders, the RCMP began looking for anyone who might have had a motive to harm Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie. Attention quickly turned to their next-door neighbor, 22-year-old Gregory Allan Desprez. Known locally as a quiet and somewhat isolated young man, Desprez had been involved in minor disputes with the couple, including arguments about property boundaries. These tensions, while seemingly minor, became a key focus for investigators. By the morning of April 26th, 2005, it became clear that Desprez was no longer in his home. He had packed a vehicle with several weapons, including a hatchet, knives, and a homemade sword, and had begun a calculated journey south toward the United States. RCMP officers realized that the suspect was now operating outside Canadian jurisdiction, creating a complex international manhunt. Desprez reached the border crossing at Calais, Maine, where U.S. Customs officers questioned him about the weapons. In a bizarre encounter, he claimed to be a U.S. Marine and spoke of having extensive combat experience. The officers confiscated the weapons and recorded his fingerprints, but could not detain him due to his dual citizenship and lack of an active Canadian warrant at that time. Unaware that the bodies of Fred and Verna had already been discovered, Desprez was allowed to continue into the United States. Meanwhile, the RCMP issued an all-points bulletin alerting law enforcement agencies across North America. Desprez became an immediate person of interest, and his image and description were widely circulated. The news created alarm in both Canada and the northeastern United States, with media coverage highlighting the unusual nature of a suspect fleeing the country so quickly after a violent crime. Over the next few days, Desprez traveled through several states, hitchhiking and moving quietly to avoid detection. Law enforcement coordinated with local authorities to track sightings, but the young man managed to stay ahead of them. His movements appeared random, but investigators noted that he seemed to be heading toward coastal regions, possibly to continue traveling undetected. On April 27, 2005, a Massachusetts state trooper spotted DesRoches walking along the side of a highway in Mattapoisett. Recognizing that something was off, the officer approached and detained him without incident. After confirming his identity and learning of the murders in Minto, law enforcement knew that the international manhunt was over. Following his arrest, legal proceedings began to return DesRoches to Canada. After months of extradition hearings, he was sent back to New Brunswick on September 15, 2005. The town of Minto watched closely as their neighbor and alleged murderer returned to face Canadian justice. His arrival marked the end of the flight, but the beginning of a complex and controversial legal battle that would keep the community on edge. The arrest did not ease the fear that had settled over Minto. Residents remained shaken by the realization that the perpetrator had lived so close to the victims and could move undetected for days. The RCMP immediately began preparing for the next phase of the case, understanding DesRoches' motives and mental state, which would soon become central to the investigation. With Gregory DesRoches back in custody in New Brunswick, the focus of the investigation shifted from locating him to understanding his state of mind. Mental health experts were called in to assess the young man, who by all accounts had lived a relatively isolated life in Minto. Born in 1982, DesRoches had spent parts of his childhood in Massachusetts before returning to New Brunswick as a teenager. Friends and family described him as quiet and withdrawn, but they also recalled moments of unusual behavior that suggested early signs of instability. As psychologists examined him, it became clear that DesRoches suffered from a severe mental disorder. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that caused him to experience delusions and impaired judgment. These delusions often led him to believe he was part of secret missions or in danger from imagined enemies. For DesRoches, the boundary between reality and his own perceptions had become blurred, influencing his interactions with neighbors and others in the community. Investigators also uncovered a pattern of erratic behavior prior to the murders. Neighbors had reported disputes with DesRoches over minor property disagreements, and there were accounts of him spending long periods alone in his home, talking to himself and sometimes engaging in ritualistic behaviors. Although these incidents had not previously escalated to violence, they painted a picture of a young man struggling with profound mental instability. The RCMP worked closely with forensic psychiatrists to reconstruct the events leading up to the murders. They found that DesRoches' actions appeared methodical in some ways, including the collection of weapons and planning for escape, but were also heavily influenced by his distorted perceptions of reality. Experts emphasized that while he carried out deliberate steps, his understanding of right and wrong was compromised by his illness. During interviews, DesRoches made statements that further highlighted the depth of his delusions. He described scenarios in which he believed he was under threat or on a mission, demonstrating how disconnected he was from the actual circumstances surrounding his neighbors. These accounts became central to the legal defense, as they indicated that his mental disorder significantly impaired his judgment at the time of the crime. Community members struggled to reconcile the young man they thought they knew with the one described by psychiatric experts. The realization that a local resident could commit such acts while genuinely believing in alternate realities shocked the town. Mental health professionals warned that the case would challenge conventional ideas of criminal responsibility, setting the stage for a highly complex trial. The assessment of DesRoches' mental state also raised questions about early intervention and community awareness. Experts noted that warning signs had been visible for years, but without proper resources or recognition, they had gone unaddressed. This insight contributed to broader discussions in New Brunswick about the importance of mental health services in preventing tragedies. By late 2005, The RCMP and legal teams had compiled extensive reports on Desroches' psychiatric history, behavioral patterns, and the circumstances surrounding the murders. These reports would form the backbone of both the prosecution and defense arguments in court. As the trial date approached, it was clear that this case was not only about a crime, but also about how the justice system interprets actions committed by someone living with a serious mental illness. After months of preparation, Gregory Desroches' trial began in the Fredericton Court of Queen's Bench in early 2008. The courtroom was tense, filled with members of the Minto community, family members of Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie, and journalists covering the case. The trial would not only examine the facts of the murders, but also test the legal system's handling of individuals with severe mental disorders. Legal experts emphasized that the case would challenge how the courts balance public safety, accountability, and mental health considerations. The prosecution presented detailed evidence linking Desroches to the crime scene. Investigators described the sequence of events on April 23, 2005, including his collection of weapons, the forced entry into the Fulton and Decarie home, and his flight across the border into the United States. They highlighted the methodical nature of his actions, emphasizing that he had planned and executed the murders before attempting to evade capture. Testimony from the RCMP provided a clear timeline of the investigation, the discovery of the victims, and the subsequent international manhunt. The defense, however, focused on Desroches' diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Psychiatric experts testified that at the time of the murders, Desroches was experiencing severe delusions and could not fully understand the consequences of his actions. They described episodes of hallucinations and distorted beliefs in which Desroches viewed himself as a soldier or operative on a secret mission. The defense argued that while he committed the acts, his mental state rendered him unable to comprehend that what he was doing was morally or legally wrong. Throughout the trial, the court examined his previous behaviors and interactions with the community, including disputes with Fred Fulton over property and his history of isolation and erratic conduct. Evidence also included his statements at the U.S. border, where he made claims about being a trained assassin, reflecting his distorted perception of reality rather than calculated deception. The defense used this to demonstrate the depth of his psychosis and the necessity of considering mental illness in assessing criminal responsibility. On March 5th, 2008, Justice William Grant delivered the verdict. He acknowledged that the Crown had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Desroches had caused the deaths of Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie. Yet, after reviewing the psychiatric evaluations and expert testimony, he concluded that Desroches was not criminally responsible due to his severe mental disorder at the time of the murders. This verdict meant that Desroches would not serve a traditional prison sentence, but would instead be held in a secure psychiatric facility for treatment and monitoring. The judge's decision sparked strong reactions within the courtroom and across the community. Family members of the victims expressed frustration and disbelief, feeling that justice had not been fully served. Legal analysts noted that the verdict highlighted the unique challenges in cases involving severe mental illness, particularly when the individual's actions are violent and premeditated. It also prompted broader discussions in New Brunswick about mental health resources, legal standards for criminal responsibility, and the protection of public safety. Desroches was subsequently transferred to the Shepady Healing Center, a high-security psychiatric facility within the Dorchester Penitentiary. His treatment would be reviewed regularly to determine if he still posed a risk to the public, with hearings occurring every 2 years. Officials emphasized that the decision was rooted in ensuring both community safety and the provision of appropriate care for someone with a serious mental disorder. The trial of Gregory Desroches became a landmark case in Canadian law, demonstrating how courts navigate the complex intersection of mental illness and criminal responsibility. While it provided a legal resolution, it left the families and community with lingering questions about justice and accountability. The case would continue to influence discussions on mental health policies, criminal law, and public safety in New Brunswick for years to come. Following the verdict, Gregory Desprez remained at the Shepady Healing Center, where his condition continued to be closely monitored. Over the years, reports from the facility painted a troubling picture. Desprez repeatedly refused treatment, showing little cooperation with psychiatrists and staff. He also engaged in threatening behavior, including making violent statements toward personnel, which highlighted that he continued to pose a risk. The facility responded by maintaining strict security measures, and at times, Desprez was transferred between sections of the center to ensure safety for both staff and other patients. Periodic review hearings assessed whether Desprez could be safely reintegrated into a less secure environment. In February 2024, the review board noted that his judgment remained poor and that he continued to display aggressive tendencies. Requests to transfer him out of the province were repeatedly denied, reflecting authorities' concern for public safety. As recently as February 2025, the review board decided he should remain at the federal facility. Officials emphasized that the decision was necessary to protect both the public and those responsible for his care. For the families of Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie, these hearings reopened old wounds. Attending the sessions became a way to advocate for the memory of their loved ones and to ensure that the ongoing threat posed by Desprez was not overlooked. Relatives expressed deep frustration with a system they felt prioritized the perpetrator's rights over the victim's legacy. Despite the legal and psychiatric processes in place, they continued to struggle with the emotional impact of the murders and the knowledge that their neighbor remained a danger. The community of Minto also faced a lasting impact. Local residents, who once felt completely safe in their small town, remained cautious and vigilant. In response, community groups organized memorials and fundraising events to honor Fred and Verna. The funds often supported local music programs and charitable initiatives, ensuring that their contributions to the town's life were remembered. These acts of remembrance became an important part of the town's healing process. The murder of Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie also sparked broader discussions in New Brunswick about mental health care, criminal responsibility, and public safety. Legal experts, psychiatrists, and policymakers examined the case as an example of how the justice system balances severe mental illness with accountability for violent acts. The case continues to be cited in discussions about reforming policies for managing dangerous individuals diagnosed with severe mental disorders. For many in Minto, the tragedy remains a stark reminder that even in small towns, violence can strike unexpectedly. Yet, through memorials, community efforts, and public discussions, the memory of Fred and Verna has been preserved. Their lives are remembered not only for their tragic deaths, but for the kindness, music, and warmth they brought to their town. Ultimately, the case of Gregory Desprez stands as a cautionary tale about the intersection of severe mental illness and the law. It illustrates the ongoing challenges faced by families, communities, and legal systems when dealing with dangerous individuals who are also mentally unwell. The story of Fred Fulton and Verna Decarie is a reminder of the enduring importance of community vigilance, legal clarity, and remembrance for those whose lives were lost in the most shocking and tragic circumstances. To understand why Daniel Baker's disappearance shook Halifax so deeply, you first need to understand who he was. Daniel was 40 years old in 1997, born and raised in Nova Scotia. He wasn't a stranger to the city streets where he vanished. Halifax was home, a place he knew intimately. People who knew him described him as thoughtful and dependable, a man quietly rebuilding his life after periods of personal struggle. Daniel stood 6'1" and had a slender frame, weighing around 155 pounds. He had short, dark blonde hair, fair skin, and bright blue eyes that friends often recalled as calm and attentive. His appearance was unassuming, but he carried himself with a sense of quiet purpose. Daniel's life at the time of his disappearance had an air of stability. He had recently moved back to Halifax from Bridgewater in July of 1997, choosing to reconnect with his old neighborhood and resume work and daily routines he had long left behind. Those close to him said Daniel enjoyed the simple routines of city life. He knew his streets, the restaurants, and the small shops in his area. His move back to Halifax was not impulsive. It was a deliberate decision to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Friends and family described him as someone who valued routine, who rarely acted without thought, and who had no known conflicts that might endanger him. Even in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Daniel's life appeared ordinary. He went to work, ran errands, and spent time with family. There were no warnings, no messages, hinting at fear or danger, and no plans to leave suddenly. That ordinary, predictable existence is part of what makes the events of December 12th so chilling. Here was a man living a normal life, familiar with his surroundings, who vanished in a way that defies logic. By looking closely at who Daniel Baker was, his habits, his personality, and his life in Halifax, we begin to see why his disappearance is so haunting. It wasn't a case of someone lost in a strange city or caught in a dangerous situation by accident. This was a man who walked out of his home for a simple, short journey and then simply disappeared. The story of Daniel Baker begins not with chaos or danger, but with the quiet, ordinary life of a man who should have been safe in his own city. The evening of Daniel Baker's disappearance began like any other Friday night in Halifax. It was December 12th, 1997, and the city was settled into the early winter chill. Daniel was at a house on Preston Street, a residential area not far from the bustling commercial stretch of Quinpool Road. Around 11 p.m., he decided to step out for a short walk to a nearby restaurant, a journey that, under normal circumstances, would have taken just a few minutes. Daniel dressed for the winter weather, wearing a black suede jacket, blue jeans, and black leather gloves. Underneath, he wore a dark blue, red, and white dress shirt, and on his feet were white Reebok sneakers. Every detail of his clothing would later become a critical part of police descriptions, as these were the last known visual records of him. The walk Daniel planned was short, along well-lit streets that would have seen some late-night foot and vehicle traffic. Preston Street leads directly to Quinpool Road, a main thoroughfare lined with shops and restaurants. Despite the late hour, the route was familiar and safe, a path he had walked many times before. Yet, within moments of leaving the house, Daniel simply vanished. Witnesses did not see anything unusual, and no disturbances were reported in the immediate area. There were no sounds of a struggle and no objects left behind that might suggest an accident or confrontation. By the time anyone realized he had not arrived at the restaurant, Daniel had already disappeared from the streets of Halifax. His last known direction was north along Preston Street toward Quinpool Road, but he never reached his destination. The suddenness of his disappearance left an immediate sense of urgency. Daniel had walked only a short distance, yet in the span of those few minutes, he seemed to disappear into thin air. The ordinary walk that evening transformed into a baffling mystery, one that left family, friends, and neighbors stunned and searching for answers. For a man so familiar with his surroundings, who was taking no unusual risks, his disappearance was as inexplicable as it was terrifying. The night Daniel vanished would mark the beginning of one of Nova Scotia's most puzzling unsolved cases, a case defined not by evidence, but by absence. The streets he walked remained ordinary, familiar, and visible, yet he was gone without a trace, leaving behind a question that would haunt the city for decades to come. Once it became clear that Daniel Baker had not returned from his short walk, concern quickly turned into alarm. His family reported him missing to the Halifax Regional Police, triggering an investigation that would stretch over decades. From the very beginning, officers were faced with an unusual challenge. There was no obvious crime scene, no signs of a struggle, and no immediate clues to follow. In the first days after his disappearance, police canvassed the neighborhood thoroughly. They knocked on doors along Preston Street and Quinpool Road, speaking with residents and local business owners. Investigators worked to recreate Daniel's final known movements, seeking anyone who might have seen him during that brief walk. Despite these efforts, every lead turned cold. Neighbors reported nothing out of the ordinary, and there were no eyewitness accounts to indicate what might have happened. Authorities also examined Daniel's personal life for possible explanations. They interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members to understand his routines, relationships, and state of mind. Daniel had no known conflicts, no unexplained debts, and no history suggesting he would voluntarily disappear. Every question answered seemed to deepen the mystery, rather than provide clarity. Police also monitored his financial activity. Unlike some missing persons cases where accounts are accessed after someone leaves, Daniel's bank accounts showed no activity. His absence from financial and personal records suggested that he did not plan to vanish. Every ordinary channel that might have offered a clue, credit card usage, phone calls, or vehicle tracking, produced nothing. Over the years, the Halifax Regional Police kept the case active. While many investigations can grow cold after months or years, Daniel's file remained open. Authorities periodically release public appeals for information, especially on anniversaries of his disappearance, hoping the time might jog a memory or encourage someone with knowledge to come forward. The investigation has been meticulous and ongoing, yet Daniel Baker has never been found, leaving his case as one of the province's most enduring mysteries. Despite decades of effort, the investigation into Daniel Baker's disappearance remains defined by absence. There is no evidence of a crime scene, no confirmed sightings since that night, and no physical trace of him anywhere along his known route. The investigation continues, relying on the hope that even the smallest detail could provide the breakthrough needed to finally answer the question, what happened to Daniel Baker? With no physical evidence or confirmed sightings, Daniel Baker's disappearance has fueled numerous theories, though none can be proven. One of the most widely considered possibilities is foul play. Authorities, including the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, treat the case as suspicious. Daniel's disappearance is included in the province's Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, which offers up to $150,000 for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. This program is reserved for cases where foul play is strongly suspected, highlighting the seriousness with which investigators view the situation. Some theorize that Daniel could have encountered a stranger or been the target of a carefully planned act. The complete lack of evidence, however, makes it nearly impossible to determine what, if anything, happened that night. If someone did intend to harm him, they managed to leave no trace, no belongings, no witnesses, and no forensic evidence. It is a level of precision that has made the case particularly confounding to investigators. Another possibility considered by some is that Daniel experienced a sudden accident. Given the short distance of his walk and the urban setting, it would have to have been extraordinary for an accident to leave no trace at all. Some have suggested he could have fallen or become trapped in an area that is rarely visited, though nothing was ever found to support this. Even searches along nearby waterways and public spaces turned up no clues. A third, though less likely, theory is that Daniel chose to disappear voluntarily. Friends and family consistently report that he had no indication of wanting to leave, no plans to abandon his life, and no behavior suggesting he intended to vanish. Staying hidden for decades without using bank accounts, contacting anyone, or leaving a digital trace would have required an almost impossible level of planning. For investigators and loved ones alike, this scenario remains difficult to reconcile with the man they knew. Ultimately, every theory raises more questions than answers. If foul play occurred, who was involved and why? If an accident happened, how did it leave no evidence? And if he disappeared by choice, how could someone erase themselves so completely from public and private records? Each unanswered question contributes to the enduring mystery of Daniel Baker, a case that has puzzled Halifax for nearly 3 decades and continues to challenge investigators today. Nearly 3 decades have passed since Daniel Baker vanished on that December night in 1997, yet his disappearance continues to resonate deeply with his family and the Halifax community. For his loved ones, the absence of answers has been a source of lasting grief. Each year brings the same questions, the same uncertainty, and the same hope that someone, somewhere, may finally provide a clue. The city itself has not forgotten him. Daniel's case is frequently cited in discussions of unsolved disappearances in Nova Scotia, and his story has become part of the local consciousness, a reminder of how suddenly a life can be interrupted and how mysterious the world can sometimes be. Law enforcement continues to maintain the investigation as active, releasing appeals for information and updating public notices to keep awareness alive. The $150,000 reward, offered through the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, remains available, emphasizing that authorities are still seeking leads. Investigators stress that even the smallest piece of information, something that may have seemed insignificant at the time, could be crucial in finally solving the case. The continued efforts demonstrate a commitment to finding justice and closure for Daniel and his family. While decades of investigation have produced no definitive answers, the hope persists that the truth will one day emerge, whether through new evidence, a witness coming forward, or a chance discovery. The story of Daniel Baker is far from closed. His disappearance is a reminder that some mysteries endure, haunting communities and families for generations. Daniel Baker remains missing, and his story is a quiet but powerful testament to the unresolved nature of many disappearances. The search for answers continues, fueled by the determination of law enforcement, the vigilance of the public, and the enduring love of those who have never stopped hoping. Until the day the mystery is solved, Daniel's absence serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring need for answers in the face of the unknown. Allan Joseph Legere was born in the early 1940s in northern New Brunswick, growing up around the small communities that sit along the Miramichi River. He spent his early years moving between local towns with relatives and guardians, living a life that never had much stability. As he reached adulthood, he became known to police for offenses such as car theft, fraud, and other small crimes. These early encounters with the law revealed a man who was willing to bend rules and manipulate people, but at that time, no one imagined the violent path he would later take. By the early 1980s, Legere was working as a mechanic and drifting between short-term jobs, often quitting or being dismissed because of unreliable behavior. He surrounded himself with people who shared his interest in quick money, and he began planning more serious offenses. His reputation in the region grew quietly, marked by intimidation and sudden bursts of anger that unsettled those who knew him. Even with this pattern, the wider community had little sense of the danger he posed, since his crimes stayed out of major headlines and were seen as isolated incidents. As the decade unfolded, Legere and 2 associates began targeting small businesses in rural parts of New Brunswick. Their aim was simple: find isolated locations, take cash, and escape before anyone could react. In the community of Black River Bridge, a locally owned convenience store, connected to the home of John and Mary Glendenning, became one of the places they watched. The Glendennings were well known in the area, and their store sat along a quiet road with very few neighbors. For Legere, the small setting and predictable routine made the location an appealing target. In June of 1986, after several days of planning, Legere and the 2 men he worked with decided to break into the Glendenning property during the night. Their intention was to steal money and valuables, believing the couple would cooperate if threatened. The situation, however, unfolded in ways that went far beyond the theft they had planned. The violent crime that followed shocked the region, pulling Legere out of the shadows and placing him directly in the sights of police investigators. Mary Glendenning survived the attack and gave a detailed statement that identified the men responsible. Her description, supported by physical evidence, pointed clearly to Legere as the ringleader. Police were able to locate all 3 suspects within days, bringing them into custody and preparing a case that would receive widespread attention throughout the province. The investigation revealed that Legere showed a clear willingness to escalate his behavior when cornered, marking a turning point in how law enforcement viewed him. In early 1987, Legere went to trial for the crimes at Black River Bridge. After several days of testimony, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison at the Atlantic Institution, a federal maximum security facility in Renault, New Brunswick. For many people in the Miramichi region, the conviction provided a sense of relief and closure. A dangerous offender was behind bars, and the community believed the worst was over. Although the sentence appeared final, Legere was already thinking about ways to regain control of his life. He studied the routines inside the prison, looked for weaknesses, and built a calm, cooperative image that made him seem less threatening to guards and staff. This behavior created an impression that he was adjusting to incarceration, even though he was quietly planning his next move. The stage was set for a future event that no one in New Brunswick could have predicted, a moment that would open the door to one of the most intense manhunts in Canadian history. Part 1 ends here, as the community rests under a sense of false security, unaware that the darkest chapter of the Allan Legere story was still ahead. By the spring of 1989, Allan Legere had already spent more than 2 years inside the Atlantic Institution, maximum security prison in the community of Renault. Officials believed he was securely contained, but Legere had been quietly studying routines, observing weaknesses, and holding on to a determination to regain his freedom. His chance arrived in early May when he reported an ongoing ear problem that required treatment outside the prison walls. Despite his violent history, he was approved for an escorted medical trip to the Dr. Georges L. Dumont Hospital in the city of Moncton, a decision that would later be heavily criticized. On the morning of early May of 1989, Legere was transported under guard for what was supposed to be a routine appointment. During the trip, he appeared calm and cooperative, giving no indication of what he had planned. Once inside the hospital, he asked to use a washroom, a request the guards allowed. They had no way of knowing he had smuggled in a small metal tool fashioned from a dismantled antenna, which he had hidden on his body long before the appointment. Inside that washroom, Legere freed himself from his restraints and burst out of the door before officers could react. He overpowered the guards, fled into the parking lot, and escaped into a waiting vehicle after forcing the driver to comply. Although the driver was released unharmed a short time later, the message sent across New Brunswick was unmistakable. A dangerous offender with a history of extreme violence was loose. News of the escape spread quickly through the Miramichi region and beyond. Police agencies across the province coordinated a large-scale emergency response, setting up checkpoints on highways and sending officers into wooded backroads that Legere knew well from his youth. Residents who had once felt safe in their rural communities now found themselves unnerved by the possibility that he could appear anywhere without warning. Schools reviewed their safety procedures, and local businesses closed earlier than usual as uncertainty began to settle over the region. For days, there were no confirmed sightings, leaving the public anxious and authorities frustrated. The forests surrounding the Miramichi were deep, rugged, and familiar terrain for Legere, giving him an advantage that police struggled to overcome. As time passed with no clear leads, a sense of unease grew stronger. People kept their doors locked, listened carefully to every sound after sunset, and watched the news for any sign of progress. What no one knew then was that Legere was already moving through rural areas with caution and patience, using his knowledge of backroads and abandoned structures to stay hidden. He was avoiding contact and keeping ahead of search teams, and despite an intense manhunt, law enforcement lacked the tools and technology that would come years later. For now, Legere was a step ahead, and the region remained on edge. The escape marked a turning point for both the investigation and the province. It exposed security gaps, heightened community fear, and set the stage for the violent spree that would follow in the months ahead. As the search continued and days turned into weeks, residents hoped the ordeal would end soon. But the worst chapter of the story had not yet begun, and the Miramichi was heading toward a period of terror unlike anything it had ever experienced. For weeks after Allan Legere's escape in May of 1989, the small towns along the Miramichi River Valley were gripped by fear. Residents who had once left doors unlocked now secured every entry and kept watchful eyes on their neighbors. Legere, fully aware of the manhunt and police checkpoints, moved cautiously through the area, using back roads, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings to stay hidden. His knowledge of the terrain gave him an advantage over authorities, allowing him to strike suddenly and vanish without a trace. On May 29th, 1989, the first confirmed attacks occurred in the town of Chatham. Annie Flam, an elderly woman who ran a small convenience shop, was murdered in her home. Her sister, Nina Flam, was severely beaten but survived. These attacks marked the beginning of a terrifying pattern. Legere's actions were calculated to instill fear, targeting vulnerable members of the community while leaving chaos and uncertainty in his wake. The attacks caused widespread panic throughout the Miramichi region. Residents began barricading doors and windows, and many stayed indoors after dark. The local police, overwhelmed by the scale and speed of Legere's movements, called for reinforcements from surrounding communities and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Helicopters, patrols, and roadblocks became a daily sight as law enforcement sought to track the elusive criminal. By October of 1989, the violence escalated. Sisters Donna and Linda Donnie were discovered dead in their home in Newcastle. Both women had been attacked, and the house was set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. These murders intensified fear across the province. People realized that Legere was targeting anyone in his path, and no home felt safe. Small towns that had always felt secure now experienced sleepless nights and heightened anxiety. The media coverage amplified the terror. Stories of the murders and attacks dominated newspapers, radio, and television broadcasts, giving Legere an almost mythical presence in the mind of the public. Residents were urged to report any suspicious activity, but many were too frightened to leave their homes. Parents kept children indoors, and local schools adjusted schedules to increase safety. Legere's movement through New Brunswick was methodical. He avoided large towns during the day, used wooded areas for cover, and relied on his familiarity with rural infrastructure. Even as the RCMP expanded the search and offered rewards for information, he remained elusive. His understanding of escape tactics and survival made him one of the most difficult fugitives in Canadian history. By November of 1989, the province was exhausted from months of fear and uncertainty. Communities were on edge, and law enforcement faced intense pressure to apprehend the criminal. Every new lead was pursued with urgency, but Legere's ability to stay ahead of authorities created a sense that the terror might never end. For the people of the Miramichi, life had been irreversibly changed, and the monster remained at large, striking fear into the heart of New Brunswick. By mid-November of 1989, the search for Allan Legere had become one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with local law enforcement, were using helicopters, patrols, and infrared technology to track his movements through the dense forests and rural backroads of New Brunswick. The fear and tension among residents were at an all-time high, with many refusing to leave their homes after dark. Communities shared information constantly, setting up neighborhood watches and reporting any unusual activity immediately to authorities. On the night of November 23, 1989, Legere attempted to hijack a taxi during a winter storm. The taxi driver lost control and crashed into a snowbank, giving the passengers an opportunity to escape and alert the authorities. Afterward, Legere forced the driver into a vehicle and headed back toward the Miramichi region. Law enforcement, having tracked tips and movements, set up a coordinated roadblock near a familiar area to the fugitive. The following morning, November 24th, 1989, Allan Legere was finally apprehended without incident. The RCMP had blocked all possible escape routes, leaving him with no options. Residents of the Miramichi Valley, who had endured months of terror, were relieved as news spread that the infamous monster of the Miramichi was back in custody. The arrest ended a prolonged period of fear that had gripped the province for over 6 months. Legere's capture demonstrated the importance of community vigilance combined with strategic law enforcement planning. Despite his cunning and knowledge of the terrain, the persistence of officers and the cooperation of citizens ensured that justice could be restored. The manhunt became a case study in Canadian policing, highlighting the challenges of pursuing a highly dangerous fugitive across rural and forested areas. Even after his capture, the full scope of Legere's crimes was being uncovered. Investigators collected evidence linking him to multiple murders and attacks, confirming the pattern of his predatory behavior. The arrest also reassured communities that life could gradually return to normal, although the psychological impact of the terror lingered. Families and survivors began the slow process of healing, knowing that while justice had been served, the shadow of Legere's crimes would remain in New Brunswick history. The province reflected on lessons learned from the months-long hunt. Protocols for prisoner transport, hospital escorts, and emergency communication were reviewed and updated. Legere's escape had exposed vulnerabilities in the system, prompting reforms designed to prevent future incidents. While the immediate danger had ended, the story of Allan Legere remained a stark reminder of how quickly life in small, tight-knit communities could be turned upside down by a single, dangerous individual. By late November of 1989, the Miramichi region began to regain a sense of normalcy. Businesses reopened, residents cautiously resumed daily routines, and law enforcement remained vigilant, aware that the memory of the monster of the Miramichi would linger. Legere was securely back behind bars, ending his reign of terror, but leaving a permanent mark on the hearts and minds of the community he had terrorized. After Allan Legere's arrest on November 24th, 1989, the focus shifted to ensuring he faced full accountability for his crimes. His trial, which began in August of 1991, was a landmark moment in Canadian criminal history because it relied heavily on DNA evidence, a method still new at the time. Investigators used samples collected from the crime scenes to create a genetic profile, which matched Legere's DNA on file from his earlier convictions. This forensic breakthrough allowed prosecutors to definitively link him to the murders of Annie Flam, Donna Donnie, Linda Donnie, and Father James Smith, as well as the attacks on survivors. The trial drew national attention as the evidence demonstrated the growing power of modern forensic science. The defense challenged the DNA evidence, arguing that it could be unreliable and that the genetic pool in the Miramichi area was limited, potentially producing false matches. However, the jury accepted the scientific evidence and found Allan Legere guilty on all counts in November of 1991. Justice David Dixon sentenced him to life in prison, designating him a dangerous offender with no chance of parole for 25 years, ensuring he would never harm the public again. Following the verdict, New Brunswick reflected on the profound impact of Legere's crimes on the Miramichi community. Families and neighbors who had lived in fear for months began the slow process of healing, supported by law enforcement and local organizations. His case also prompted lasting reforms in prisoner transport, hospital escort procedures, and coordination between local and federal authorities, designed to prevent future escapes by high-risk offenders. The trial emphasized the importance of combining community vigilance with advanced investigative techniques. In the years that followed, Allan Legere remained securely behind bars. He became eligible for parole in 2015 and applied in 2020, reigniting fear in the region. In January of 2021, The Parole Board of Canada denied his release, citing his status as an untreated, violent and sexual offender who still posed a threat to public safety. The decision was later upheld on appeal, reaffirming the importance of protecting communities from dangerous criminals. The legacy of Allan Legere is one of both horror and progress. He was a predator who exploited weaknesses in the system and terrorized an entire province. But his capture and prosecution demonstrated the power of forensic science, law enforcement coordination, and community vigilance. The names of his victims, John Glendenning, Annie Flam, Donna Donnie, Linda Donnie, and Father James Smith, remain a solemn reminder of the lives lost and the families forever affected. Today, the story of the monster of the Miramichi serves as a chilling example of the consequences of violent crime and the enduring importance of justice in Canadian history. Prince Edward Island, in the early 1970s, was a place of rolling green fields, quiet towns, and a strong sense of community. In the small settlement of St. Peter and St. Paul, life moved slowly. Families knew each other by name, and neighbors watched out for one another. The Ellsworth family fit perfectly into this peaceful rhythm. Oyvind and Bernadette Ellsworth lived with their young daughter Krista and often shared their home with Bernadette's sister, Gloria. Their days were filled with ordinary routines: work, school, community events, and evenings spent together in the safety of their home. The family felt secure. Their neighbors were friendly, the landscape serene, and the sense of peace unshakable. Their home had the kind of warmth and trust that small communities pride themselves on. Unbeknownst to them, however, danger lurked nearby. Just across the fields, a neighbor named Ernest Deroaches was quietly building a dark obsession. By 1974, DesRoches, who was 29 years old, had already begun troubling the community with his trespassing and unsettling behaviors. Though known to local authorities for petty offenses, he remained a presence that residents tried to avoid, not fully realizing how close the threat would come to hitting them. The Ellsworths' ordinary life, built on trust and neighborly goodwill, was about to be disrupted in a way that would shock not just their community, but all of Prince Edward Island. The calm of St. Peter and St. Paul, a town where people left doors unlocked and believed in mutual care, was about to be shattered by a neighbor's growing obsession. This first part of the story sets the stage for a nightmare that began quietly, in broad daylight, with a family that never imagined the danger staring at them from just beyond their front yard. By 1974, Ernest Joseph Deroaches had become a familiar but troubling figure in St. Peter and St. Paul. Locals described him as unpredictable, often appearing where he shouldn't be and observing families from a distance. Reports to authorities over the previous years had documented incidents of trespassing and theft, but none suggested the extreme danger he would soon pose. DesRoches' behavior was escalating, and the Ellsworth family quickly became the focus of his attention. The family noticed him lurking near their property, watching their movements, and making their quiet home feel unsafe. What had begun as odd encounters now grew into an ongoing, threatening presence. Ivan and Bernadette Ellsworth, along with Bernadette's sister Gloria, realized that their pleas for privacy and safety were being ignored. Concerned for their well-being, they approached the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, explaining DesRoches' history of harassment and his recent obsession with their family. Authorities took the complaint seriously and arrested DesRoches, but he was released shortly afterward due to legal technicalities and the limited nature of his prior offenses. This release proved to be critical. Instead of deterring him, it appeared to fuel his fixation on the Ellsworths. What was once a series of unsettling incidents transformed into a focused and dangerous vendetta. Neighbors were alarmed, and whispers of fear began to circulate through the community. The Ellsworths, once confident in the safety of their home, were now acutely aware that a direct threat had emerged within the familiar streets they had trusted. It became clear that DesRoches' behavior was no longer just a nuisance. It was a serious risk that could escalate at any moment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change the lives of the Ellsworth family and leave a lasting mark on the history of Prince Edward Island. February 21st, 1974, began as a cold, quiet winter day in St. Peter and St. Paul, Prince Edward Island. For the Ellsworth family, it was a typical Thursday. Bernadette Ellsworth and her sister Gloria planned to attend their regular evening bingo at the Tignish Parish Centre, leaving Ivan Ellsworth at home. Like many homes in the area, their front door was unlocked, a reflection of the community's sense of trust and security. Ernest Deroaches, aware that the house would be empty except for Ivan, saw his opportunity. He forced his way into the home and confronted Ivan. In the moments that followed, violence erupted, leaving Ivan critically wounded. Deroches' anger and obsession had escalated to a dangerous and deadly level, far beyond the warnings the family had previously reported. As the night progressed, Bernadette and Gloria returned home, unaware of the unfolding horror inside. They were immediately confronted with the consequences of Deroches' escalating fixation. Bernadette, attempting to reason with him, reportedly asked why he was doing this. DesRoches, however, ignored her words, leaving the family trapped in a terrifying and uncontrollable situation. The aftermath of that night left the Ellsworth family deeply scarred. Gloria survived, but she was left with severe injuries, including permanent paralysis. The trauma extended beyond her physical wounds. She lost her sister, Bernadette, and her brother-in-law, Ivan, as well as her unborn child. That night shattered not only their household, but also the quiet sense of security in the small community. The attack became a defining moment in St. Peter and St. Paul. It revealed how quickly life could turn from peaceful to dangerous, even in a place where everyone knew each other. The horror of February 21st became a pivotal point, demonstrating that one person's obsession could devastate an entire family and send ripples through the entire community. After the attack on the Ellsworth family, St. Peter and St. Paul was gripped by shock and fear. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, alerted by the surviving family members, launched an immediate and thorough investigation. Officers combed the area, collecting evidence from the Ellsworth home and speaking with neighbors who had seen or heard anything unusual. In a small community like this, people remembered details others might overlook, and these accounts were crucial in piecing together the events of February 21st, 1974. Attention quickly focused on Ernest Deroaches, the neighbor who had already been reported for harassment and trespassing. Investigators interviewed him and gathered information about his movements and previous behavior. Evidence and witness accounts overwhelmingly pointed to him as the perpetrator. Within days, DesRoches was arrested, ending his immediate threat to the community, but opening the door to a long legal process that would uncover the full extent of his actions. The trial that followed drew widespread attention across Prince Edward Island. In court, the prosecution detailed the sequence of events that had led to the murders of Ivan and Bernadette Ellsworth, and the severe injuries inflicted upon Gloria. The case emphasized DesRoches' prior criminal history, including trespassing and harassment, which had escalated into violent action. The defense attempted to argue mitigating factors, but the evidence was clear and compelling. By June of 1974, Ernest Deroaches was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life terms. He was also held responsible for the attack on Gloria Ellsworth, which left her with permanent injuries. The community, while relieved to see justice served, was left to grapple with the profound impact of his crimes. The trial reinforced the devastating consequences of a person's unchecked obsession and served as a warning about the potential for danger, even in small, seemingly safe communities. Over the years, DesRoches' time in prison became the subject of ongoing attention. In 1980, while at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick, he and 2 other inmates took correctional officers hostage in a failed escape attempt. The incident ended tragically, with 1 officer losing their life during the resolution of the siege. This event further cemented his reputation as a dangerous individual and reinforced the necessity of keeping him incarcerated. The legal and correctional history of DesRoches would continue to dominate conversations about public safety and justice in Prince Edward Island. Parole hearings over the decades reflected both his persistent threat and the difficulty in balancing rehabilitation with community protection. By remaining in prison for over 40 years, DesRoches ensured that he could no longer directly threaten anyone, but the scars he left behind endured in the lives of the Ellsworth family and the memory of the island. The aftermath of Ernest Deroaches' crimes left an indelible mark on St. Peter and St. Paul, and on Prince Edward Island as a whole. For the survivors, especially Gloria Ellsworth, life was forever altered. She faced the daily reality of her paralysis and the loss of her sister, brother-in-law, and unborn child. Despite the trauma, Gloria's resilience became a powerful example of human strength. Over the years, she spoke publicly about her experiences, highlighting the lasting effects of violence and the importance of community support and recovery. The Ellsworth family tragedy also prompted a broader reflection across the island on safety, law enforcement, and community awareness. Residents began to take even small signs of harassment seriously, recognizing that unchecked behavior could escalate into extreme violence. The case emphasized the need for timely intervention and strengthened the relationship between citizens and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. For many, the lesson was clear. Vigilance and communication could prevent similar horrors in the future. Ernest Deroaches remained in prison for decades, a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. His refusal to participate in rehabilitation programs, combined with his deviant behavior, kept him behind bars. In November of 2020, at the age of 74, DesRoches died of natural causes at Millhaven Institution, a maximum security prison in Ontario. With his death, any lingering fear of him returning to the community ended, though the memory of his crimes remained vivid. The story of the Ellsworth family and Ernest Deroaches continues to resonate in Prince Edward Island. It is cited in discussions about criminal justice, public safety, and victim advocacy. Schools, local organizations, and law enforcement occasionally reference the case to educate the community about the importance of reporting suspicious behavior and supporting survivors. It has become part of the island's dark history, a cautionary tale about how violence can emerge even in the most peaceful places. Ultimately, the case of Ernest Deroaches is a testament to both the fragility and resilience of human communities. While he took lives and caused unimaginable suffering, the courage and endurance of Gloria Ellsworth and the broader community stand as a lasting legacy. The Ellsworth family's story reminds us that even in the face of terrible tragedy, survival, strength, and the determination to protect others can endure. Prince Edward Island, known for its beauty and tranquility, now carries a story of loss, vigilance, and enduring human resilience, one that will never be forgotten. Dieppe, New Brunswick, is a community known for its calm streets, friendly neighbors, and a sense of safety rare in many parts of the world. On September 7th, 2019, that sense of security was completely destroyed. Bernard Saulnier, 78, and his wife, Rosemarie Saulnier, 74, were discovered dead in their home on Amiralt Street. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed almost immediately that both deaths were homicides. The news sent shockwaves through the city. Neighbors described the couple as kind, active in local organizations, and deeply involved in the community. Bernard had once served as president of the local Rotary Club and was known in the construction industry, while Rosemarie ran her own naturopathic and nutrition business. Their home, normally a place of warmth and family gatherings, had become the center of one of the most puzzling cases in recent New Brunswick history. The investigation began with the RCMP's major crime unit securing the scene and collecting evidence. Forensic teams worked tirelessly inside and around the Saulnier home, documenting every detail. Local residents were asked to stay alert, and police spoke directly to the media about the unusual nature of the crime. In a town where violent crime is rare, a double homicide like this was not just shocking, it was unimaginable. Early indications suggested the killings were not random. Authorities noted signs that the victims may have been specifically targeted, though no clear motive was immediately apparent. While the police investigated, the city of Dieppe entered a state of unease. Residents locked their doors and watched out for one another, worried that the person responsible might still be at large. Amid this growing tension, the RCMP quietly began connecting threads that would eventually lead far beyond the quiet streets of Dieppe, into a complex web involving criminal networks and hidden motives. As the initial shock of the Saulnier's death settled, the RCMP began following leads that would gradually reveal a complex web surrounding the family. Early in the investigation, officers noticed connections between the couple's household and local criminal activity, though Bernard and Rosemarie themselves had no known involvement in illegal matters. The first significant clue came from ongoing police operations related to drug trafficking in New Brunswick. On August 28, 2019, just 10 days before the murders, the RCMP had executed a series of raids across the province as part of Operation J Trilogy, a major effort to dismantle methamphetamine and drug networks in Moncton and Fredericton. Several arrests were made, and a notable quantity of drugs and weapons was seized. While the initial investigation into these raids focused on criminal elements in the province, investigators later realized there was an unexpected connection to the Saulnier family. Police discovered that the Saulnier's son, Silvio Saulnier, was allegedly linked to the same drug network targeted by Operation J Trilogy. Court documents indicated that Silvio had been involved in activities connected to drug distribution, including the purchase of a property on Dominion Street in Moncton, used for drug sales. The RCMP began exploring whether the murders of Bernard and Rosemarie were connected to these criminal activities, rather than being random acts of violence. Interviews with associates of the drug network and analysis of communication records suggested that the elderly couple may have been killed because of their son's ties, though they were not the intended targets themselves. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation from a simple homicide to a much broader criminal context, revealing that the quiet town of Dieppe had been unknowingly caught in the crossfire of organized crime. After years of painstaking investigation, the RCMP finally made a breakthrough in the Dieppe double homicide. On September 7th, 2023, exactly 4 years after Bernard and Rosemarie Saulnier were found dead, police arrested Jansen Brian Baker, a 29-year-old man from Moncton, New Brunswick. Baker had a lengthy criminal record, including prior involvement in drug-related offenses, which made him a person of interest once investigators connected the murders to the same criminal network surrounding Silvio Saulnier. Police charged Baker with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Bernard and Rosemarie. Investigators believed that he had been hired or motivated by individuals tied to the drug network, and that the killings were not random acts of violence, but rather targeted attacks linked to the criminal underworld. For the community of Dieppe, the arrest brought a measure of relief and hope that answers were finally coming, though the complexity of the case was far from resolved. In the weeks following the arrest, investigators delved deeper into Baker's connections, discovering communications and evidence that tied him to other associates of the drug network. The RCMP emphasized that the case was unusually complicated because the actual intended target may not have been the elderly couple themselves, but their son, Silvio Saulnier. Legal proceedings were scheduled, and Baker was held in custody as police prepared the case for trial. The arrest also reignited public discussion about safety in small communities, and the unexpected reach of organized crime in New Brunswick. Families of the victims expressed cautious optimism, hoping the judicial system could finally deliver justice after so many years of uncertainty. While the arrest of Jansen Baker was a significant step forward, investigators warned that uncovering the full truth would require examining the wider conspiracy and all individuals involved. The case had entered a new and critical phase, one that would eventually reveal shocking twists beyond anyone's expectations. The investigation into the Dieppe double homicide took a dramatic turn on November 24th, 2025, when the RCMP announced the uncovering of a broader conspiracy. Through months of careful forensic work, digital evidence analysis, and witness testimony, police revealed that Bernard and Rose-Marie Saulnier had likely not been the intended targets. The real focus of the plot had been their son, Silvio Saulnier, due to his involvement with a criminal drug network operating in the Moncton and Fredericton areas. 5 individuals were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, in addition to Jansen Brian Baker, who had already been charged with the killings. The RCMP named Jesse Todd Logue, Monique Alicia Boyer, Nicholas Daniel Bain, and Christopher Allan Lennon. Investigators alleged that these individuals were connected through the same organized crime circle that Silvio had dealings with, and that the murders of Bernard and Rose-Marie were carried out either as collateral damage or as a message within the network. Police emphasized the complexity of the case, noting that it spanned years of criminal activity and involved multiple layers of planning. Evidence showed that Baker and the co-accused had coordinated surveillance, planning, and communication well in advance of the murders. The use of encrypted messaging and safe houses suggested a sophisticated attempt to conceal their activities, highlighting the danger posed by organized crime even in quiet communities like Dieppe. For the families of Bernard and Rose-Marie, the revelation was both shocking and painful. They had mourned the deaths of their loved ones under the belief that the attack was random, only to learn that a calculated criminal conspiracy had brought violence into their lives. Legal experts noted that the case now involved both first-degree murder charges and additional conspiracy charges, significantly complicating the trial process. The RCMP stated publicly that uncovering the conspiracy was a crucial step in understanding the full scope of the crime. By connecting the dots between Baker, the co-accused, and the criminal network surrounding Silvio Saulnier, investigators hope to bring justice not only for Bernard and Rose-Marie, but also to fully dismantle the network that had endangered so many lives. The Dieppe double homicide had transformed from a baffling mystery into a chilling story of organized crime intersecting tragically with an innocent family's life. As of late 2025, the Dieppe double homicide case continues to be a focus of both the courts and the public. Jansen Brian Baker is awaiting trial for the first-degree murders of Bernard and Rose-Marie Saulnier, with proceedings scheduled to begin in January 2026. The trial is expected to last approximately 3 months, during which prosecutors will present evidence connecting Baker to the deaths, while the defense may explore his background and criminal history. In addition, the 4 co-accused, Jesse Todd Logue, Monique Alicia Boyer, Nicholas Daniel Bain, and Christopher Allan Lennon, face conspiracy charges related to a plot targeting Silvio Saulnier. Their first court appearance on these charges is set for December 1st, 2025. The legal developments have reopened old wounds for the Saulnier family. While they finally have answers regarding the identity of those responsible, the revelation that Bernard and Rose-Marie were likely not the intended targets has made the tragedy even more difficult to process. Community members in Dieppe continue to struggle with the knowledge that organized crime reached into their quiet town, claiming the lives of 2 well-respected elders. Local leaders and neighbors have expressed both relief that arrests were made and frustration that the full motive and extent of the criminal network's activities are still being revealed. For law enforcement, the case is a reminder of the challenges involved in unraveling complex criminal conspiracies. The RCMP highlighted the importance of persistence, noting that years of investigation, cross-border collaboration, and careful analysis of digital evidence were necessary to connect the murders to the broader criminal network. Police continued to urge the public to remain vigilant and report suspicious activity, emphasizing that even seemingly quiet communities can be affected by organized crime. Meanwhile, Dieppe has worked to honor the memory of Bernard and Rosemarie. Friends, neighbors, and community organizations have organized memorials and fundraising events in their name, ensuring that their contributions to local life are not forgotten. Silvio Saulnier's role in the larger criminal context has remained a complex and sensitive topic, but the focus on justice for his parents remains paramount. The Dieppe double homicide stands as a cautionary tale about the unpredictable reach of criminal activity and the devastating impact it can have on innocent families. As the upcoming trials proceed, the community hopes for clarity, accountability, and a sense of closure. The full story of what happened on September 7th, 2019, and why it happened, now rests with the courts, with justice for Bernard and Rosemarie Saulnier hanging in the balance. In January of 1992, 18-year-old Andrea King left her home in British Columbia, full of excitement and hope for her first solo adventure across Canada. She'd been saving money for months, planning to travel coast to coast, experience new places, and meet new people along the way. Her first stop was Halifax, Nova Scotia, a city she had never visited before. Andrea had arranged to stay at a local youth hostel and was eager to explore the city's waterfront, historic streets, and vibrant culture. On New Year's Day, she boarded her flight, calling her family to let them know she had arrived safely. That phone call was brief and ordinary, but it would become the last time her family would hear her voice. Upon landing at Halifax International Airport, she made her way to the hostel, excited to settle in and begin this chapter of her journey. Everything about her trip seemed routine and hopeful, but in the quiet of the city, a series of events was about to unfold that would shatter her family's world and leave Halifax haunted by questions that remain unanswered to this day. After arriving in Halifax on January 1st, 1992, Andrea King's family expected to hear from her again within a few days. She was an organized and responsible young woman, careful to check in with loved ones while traveling. But the calls never came. Days turned into a week, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. Andrea's mother, Anne King, grew increasingly anxious. She tried calling the hostel where Andrea was supposed to be staying, but staff there told her that Andrea had never checked in. Concern turned quickly into fear as it became clear that something was very wrong. By January 4th, Anne King decided to take formal action. She reported Andrea as a missing person to the Halifax Regional Police. At first, the response from authorities was discouraging. They treated Andrea's disappearance as a case of a young adult taking an unannounced trip rather than a potential crime. This initial dismissal frustrated the family, as they knew Andrea's habits and character, understanding that she would never leave without telling anyone. Every day, without news, was an agonizing reminder of the uncertainty surrounding her fate. In the weeks following the report, the investigation began in earnest, but progress was slow. Police reached out to local airports, hostels, and transportation services, searching for records of Andrea's movements, yet found nothing beyond her initial arrival. Flyers were posted throughout the city, and local media covered the story, hoping someone might have seen her. Friends and fellow travelers were interviewed, but no new leads emerged. Andrea's absence from the hostel, combined with her lack of contact with family, created a trail that ended abruptly, leaving investigators with only questions and theories. The silence surrounding Andrea's whereabouts persisted for nearly a full year. Her family refused to give up hope, constantly pushing the police for updates and scouring the city for any trace of their daughter. Anne King even traveled to Halifax herself, distributing posters and speaking with local businesses and residents, desperate for someone to remember something small, a conversation, a sighting, a detail that might provide a clue. The sense of dread grew heavier with each passing month, and the realization that Andrea's disappearance was not a simple case of a young woman traveling alone became increasingly apparent. By December of 1992, the family and investigators had exhausted every conventional lead. The lack of information left the case in a limbo of uncertainty, with frustration mounting on all sides. Halifax, a city full of life and movement, seemed to conceal the truth behind a veil of normalcy, holding the mystery of Andrea King's fate just out of reach. It was a year marked by unanswered questions, and little did anyone know that the shocking discovery of her remains was just around the corner, ready to turn this missing person investigation into a chilling cold case. Nearly a year after Andrea King disappeared, on December 22nd, 1992, a man walking his dog in a wooded area near the Sackville Business Park in Halifax stumbled upon a disturbing scene. The location, on the outskirts of the city, yet close to bustling suburban developments, immediately caught the attention of police. Halifax Regional Police were called to the scene, and investigators quickly confirmed the worst. The remains were those of 18-year-old Andrea King. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide, raising urgent questions about how such a young woman could vanish and end up in that location without anyone noticing. The site itself was a mix of dense woods and lightly trodden paths, making it an odd place for a person to be found by accident. Police cordoned off the area and began a meticulous search for evidence, documenting the surroundings for any clues that might indicate how Andrea had been brought there. Although the body had been exposed to the elements for nearly a year, investigators still hoped that even the smallest trace, footprints, discarded items, or personal belongings, might provide a lead. Every detail mattered, as time had eroded much of the physical evidence. The discovery immediately drew media attention, and Andrea's family was notified, shattering them once again with grief and disbelief. Anne King described the moment as the realization of their worst fears, finally confirming that their daughter had not simply disappeared, but had been taken from them. The police now faced the challenge of piecing together the events of nearly 12 months prior, trying to identify potential witnesses and reconstruct Andrea's final hours in Halifax. Investigators began retracing her steps, revisiting hostels, transport hubs, and areas where Andrea was known to have spent time. They conducted interviews with locals, workers, and anyone who might have seen her during her brief stay in the city. Witness statements were sparse, and few provided consistent or actionable information. The case highlighted the difficulties of investigating a crime long after it occurred, as memories fade and evidence degrades. At the same time, forensic examinations were underway. Although DNA technology was still developing, police collected every possible sample for future testing. Clothing, personal items, and remnants found near the scene were preserved with care, in hopes that advances in technology could eventually provide answers. The realization that Andrea's disappearance had ended in murder intensified the urgency. Yet, it also underscored the challenges investigators faced with limited leads and nearly a year of lost time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that someone had intentionally brought Andrea to that secluded area. This fact shifted the focus of the investigation to individuals with potential knowledge of her movements and those with a history of predatory behavior. Halifax Regional Police maintained a perimeter of interest, interviewing known offenders and cross-referencing information from other unsolved cases. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. It confirmed Andrea's fate, but left an even deeper mystery. Who was responsible, and why had the crime gone unnoticed for so long? The case became a chilling reminder that even in a modern city, a young person could vanish, and crucial evidence could easily slip through the cracks. From this point onward, the investigation would focus on building connections between Andrea, her final known locations, and any individuals who might have interacted with her. The police recognized that solving this case would require patience, persistence, and an openness to new forensic methods as they developed in the coming decades. Every day brought the hope that a lead, no matter how small, could finally bring Andrea King's killer to justice. As the investigation into Andrea King's death progressed, Halifax regional privileges focused on individuals with known histories of violent or predatory behavior. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Andrew Paul Johnson, a former Halifax resident with a documented record as a sex offender. Johnson had been previously implicated in other unsolved cases, including the 1989 disappearance of Kimberly McAndrew, a young woman whose case bore some similarities to Andrea's. While police had no direct evidence linking him to Andrea at first, his criminal history made him a person of interest. By the late 1990s, investigators began to piece together more circumstantial connections. While serving time in a British Columbia prison, Johnson participated in a sex offender treatment program, which included writing exercises. One essay he produced described a fictional abduction and murder of a young woman, and the details alarmingly matched theories police had about Andrea King's disappearance and death. Though it was not a confession, it provided investigators with a disturbing insight into his mindset and possible methods. In addition to the essay, investigators discovered a compact mirror belonging to Andrea in a location associated with Johnson. The mirror became a key piece of physical evidence, suggesting he had been in possession of her personal property. Police hoped that combining this evidence with witness statements and behavioral patterns could build a strong case. For the King family, the discovery offered a glimmer of hope that someone was finally within reach of being held accountable. Despite these developments, the case remained complex. Much of the evidence was circumstantial, and the legal standards for prosecution required more definitive proof. Johnson's known history, though disturbing, was not enough to secure a conviction without a direct connection to the murder itself. Police continued to pursue every lead, re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing case files from other unsolved crimes in the region to identify patterns or overlaps. The limitations of forensic science in the early 1990s also hindered progress. While evidence such as the mirror and traces collected from the scene were preserved, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Investigators documented and safeguarded every piece of material they could, anticipating future advances that might provide a breakthrough. Over the following years, the case remained active, with detectives revisiting files, analyzing reports, and maintaining pressure on persons of interest, including Johnson. Throughout this time, Andrea's family remained heavily involved, advocating for continued attention to the case. They attended public meetings, engaged with media, and lobbied for the investigation to utilize emerging forensic techniques. Their persistence helped keep Andrea's story in the public eye, emphasizing that unresolved cases affect entire communities, and that time alone does not erase the need for justice. By the early 2000s, cold case detectives formally re-examined the evidence, hoping that advances in DNA testing could finally link Johnson to the crime. The combination of his past, the essay, and possession of Andrea's belongings made him a strong candidate for further scrutiny. However, the investigation was about to face a devastating setback that would further complicate an already difficult search for justice. The tangled web of circumstantial evidence, evolving forensic technology, and bureaucratic hurdles highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving crimes that had been left unresolved for years. Despite being a prime suspect, Johnson would not face trial for Andrea King's murder, leaving the case suspended in a state of limbo and Andrea's family still searching for answers. This moment marked both the high point of investigative progress and a new low in the ongoing struggle to secure justice. By the mid-2000s, investigators were hopeful that modern forensic science could finally provide the breakthrough needed in Andrea King's case. DNA technology had advanced significantly, and cold case detectives requested that preserved evidence from the scene, including the compact mirror and other personal items, be tested using the latest methods. The hope was that a clear genetic profile could either confirm suspicions about Andrew Paul Johnson or identify another individual connected to the crime. However, a shocking discovery, derailed these efforts. When police went to retrieve the evidence from storage, several critical items were missing. The disappearance of these materials meant that the possibility of a definitive forensic link had vanished. Without this proof, prosecutors could not move forward, and Johnson, while still a person of interest due to his prior offenses and the circumstantial evidence, could not be formally charged with Andrea's murder. The loss of evidence was a devastating blow to both the investigation and Andrea's family, extinguishing a rare opportunity for closure. Despite these setbacks, law enforcement has never officially closed the case. Halifax Regional Police continue to classify Andrea King's murder as active and ongoing, encouraging anyone with information, even seemingly minor details, to come forward. Over the years, tips have occasionally surfaced, but none have led to an arrest or trial. Authorities have stressed the importance of community involvement, noting that even a small piece of information can be critical in solving long unsolved crimes. The King family has remained a steadfast presence in keeping Andrea's memory alive and advocating for justice. Anne King, Andrea's mother, has spoken publicly about the case, urging witnesses or anyone with knowledge to contact police. Her persistence has ensured that Andrea's story continues to be recognized, preventing it from fading into obscurity despite more than 3 decades passing since her disappearance. Today, Andrea King's murder stands as one of Nova Scotia's most chilling cold cases. The combination of lost evidence, circumstantial connections to a prime suspect, and the passage of time has made resolution difficult, but the case has never been abandoned. Investigators and the family alike hold on to the hope that advances in forensic science, renewed tips, or someone coming forward could finally bring answers. Andrea's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lasting impact of unresolved crime. It highlights the need for meticulous evidence preservation and continuous investigation in cold cases, and it emphasizes the human toll when justice is delayed. For her family, the absence of resolution has meant living with grief, uncertainty, and unanswered questions for decades. The Halifax Regional Police and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice have offered a reward of up to 150,000 Canadian dollars for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. This incentive, along with ongoing public appeals, aims to generate new leads that could finally unlock the mystery surrounding Andrea King's death. Andrea King's journey ended tragically, but her story is far from forgotten. The hope remains that someday, through science, witness testimony, or a long overdue confession, the case will be solved. Until then, her family, community, and investigators continue to keep her memory alive, determined to ensure that the young woman who set out for adventure is remembered, and that justice, though delayed, is never denied.